Everyone who owns a home in America owns a private printing press, a private fiat currency printing press that they have access to. All they have to do is log into their bank, and to the extent, whatever their home equity line of credit is, they have a printing press that allows them to print that amount of money. And this is not an analogy. This actually is how it works. Because remember, with the way fractional reserve banking works is that the bank, when you get a loan from the bank, they don't actually have that money sitting on an account or anything like that. When they issue that money, whether it's a mortgage or cash from a line of credit, that money comes into existence from nothing. Or at least they only have to have a fraction of it in reserve. Or at least that is how it used to be. So the way it works now, at least in America, is there isn't even a reserve requirement. So just 2 years ago, when you took out $10,000 from your line of credit, the bank literally is just printing $9,000 of that, and they only have to hold $1,000 of it in reserve, which they can obtain from commercial paper markets, and if they can't get it from there, they can get it directly from the Fed. Hyperbitcoinization. That's the end game, because at that point you have two mutually supportive dynamics in play that are creating both a positive feedback and a negative feedback loop. Because on one hand, you have this buying pressure on Bitcoin that just reinforces itself, because it just keeps going up. Because when you have a few million Americans printing money out of thin air to buy Bitcoin, the price, what happens to the price of Bitcoin when its supply is just totally incapable of adjusting to that demand? Well, the price just goes, the stock, this is why I say the stock to flow model just totally breaks down. It doesn't work anymore, because what you have is this event where it's not just that Bitcoin is going parabolic, it's that Bitcoin is essentially going to infinity, because the fiat price doesn't even matter anymore. In this scenario, you have millions of middle-class Americans who are just desperately trying to get a full Bitcoin. And I think that's what's going to happen, is you're going to have this scenario where millions of middle-class Americans realize that their chance of getting a full Bitcoin is rapidly diminishing, and they will turn to their line of credits, they will turn to leverage, they will turn to debt, and use whatever they can extract from the system to get that full Bitcoin. And here's where the negative feedback loop comes, because in this event, assuming that it's precipitated by some sort of crisis, in some sort of there's the trust in the viability of the system itself has come into question. Well, now you have trillions of dollars being printed by people that are just using their line of credits or whatever leverage they can obtain to buy Bitcoin. Well, that's trillions of additional fiat that is being printed out of thin air and just sent straight into the system. Not sitting in an account somewhere, but just flooding straight into the economy. Trillions just potentially overnight being printed out of thin air. Because, again, remember, that is exactly what a line of credit is. It is a private printing press that every home-owning American has, with very favorable interest rates. And what happens in that event is that whatever crisis with fiat currency or the legacy financial system was occurring, well, that crisis has now just been amplified. It's been amplified because now, if inflation was the worry, well, now you've just got trillions of more dollars printed from nothing flooding into the economy. Now the viability of the financial system is even more called into question. The situation is even more dire. In fact, it's fatal. This is the end. This is the Bitcoin rapture. This is hyperbitcoinization, which is the other side of the coin, is that hyperbitcoinization is the fiat currency endgame. Hyperbitcoinization is the end of fiat currency as we know it, because every American who owns a home has the ability to do exactly what Michael Saylor is doing. Every American who has access to a line of credit can just can use the system against itself, can use the ability to print money out of thin air, and for once use it to their own advantage. When average middle class people who have access to things like line of credits, when they figure this out, it's game over. And that's the brilliant thing about Bitcoin, is you have Bitcoin protects itself with the mining and the hash rate and all that, but there's this other side of it that is on the offensive. The best defense is great offense, and what Bitcoin is doing in this scenario is essentially an offensive, or it's like a speculative attack upon the fiat system itself. The fatal flaw of the fiat system is that you can just print money out of thin air and inflate the supply into infinity. Well, Bitcoin uses that weakness against the system itself. Bitcoin destroys its competitors in this way. So to the extent that fiat or the legacy financial system is a threat to Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin isn't just defending against it. Bitcoin creates incentives which cause people to actively attack that system, to use the tools and the weapons of that system against itself. So this is why I think that hyperbitcoinization is the end game, yes. And I think this is one of the ways that it can play out. And keep in mind, I'm not even talking about Americans liquidating stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, and all this and putting it into Bitcoin. I'm just talking about them deciding to do exactly what Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy is doing, which is using leverage, printing money out of thin air. To the extent that Americans sell other traditional assets as well, that just puts on even more pressure. And that's why I think hyperbitcoinization, I think, is not a dream, or it's not wishful thinking. It's actually just looking at the game theory of this whole thing from a higher perspective. From a game theoretical perspective, hyperbitcoinization, I think, is inevitable. And I think certain people like Michael Saylor, they've figured this out, and they are simply the first ones to pull the trigger on it. And it hasn't been enough to trigger hyperbitcoinization itself, but they're just making sure that they're early to the game. When even when a fraction of American homeowners become little Michael Saylors, it's game over. Game over. And that's, I guess I'll wrap it up here. I will say just one more thing. If you're a middle class home-owning American and you don't already own one Bitcoin, I'm not saying that you should use your line of credit to buy one. You shouldn't. Don't get the wrong message from this. Don't use leverage. Okay? But recognize that in the final analysis, people are going to do anything to get hold of one Bitcoin. And if you are a middle-class American with a lot of liquid assets, you're probably still in a position to easily buy a full Bitcoin without using any leverage. So don't get the wrong message from this video. I repeat, do not use leverage to buy Bitcoin. Even though I think in the end game, I think that's exactly how it's going to play out.